Okay, actually, we are going to go specifically to 1893 from the 1880s. Last year at this time, we talked about the genesis of professional baseball, and really after after the Civil War, 1869, the Cincinnati Reds travel the country. They're undefeated, and they're led by the venerable Harry Wright and his younger brother George, who come out of a cricket tradition through their father, immigrants from England. And they're undefeated, and with their success, baseball is just catching on. It's spreading like wildfire to places like Fall River, etc. In 1876, I emphasized last year, Fall River won the New England Baseball Championship, had a very good team, had as good a team in 1877, finished second in New England. The only team that was better was the Boston team of the National League. So we had a great tradition, but we couldn't survive the terrible decade of the 1870s. It's a terrible time. Great Depression has set in. There's strikes in Fall River, there's anger, there's mill owners that have absconded with millions of dollars, depriving workers of the desperately needed weekly pay. There's a lot of anger, there's a lot of incapacity to enjoy such leisure. So in 1878, we had a situation where we lost people like George Gore. Now, move over Willie Mays, right? Look at this guy in the 1880s making an over-the-shoulder catch. This is George Gore, who 2 years before this is a major league scene. 2 years before this, he was the center fielder on the Fall River team that had the fastest outfield in all of professional baseball. So we've really got some good players at this particular time. You know, the kids of Fall River just love this. I had looked at this mill scene forever, and then I noticed only a couple of weeks ago there are kids playing a game of baseball right in front of the Merchants Mill, not too far from where the Bedford Street grounds would be that we're going to be talking about tonight when we talk about the professional teams of that time. So this was the city of irregularities, as they called it, by 1879, and we lost our team to New Bedford. New Bedford was led by Bancroft, who was he ended up managing 7 different teams, and he was just a great personality, and he snatched away some of our best players, including Jim Moutry, and New Bedford had the finest team in 1878. So let's turn to, as we enter the threshold of a new decade, it's 1879, and there's a lot of amateur ball now being played, and there's a pitcher named Buck, and Buck gets batted 13-0. But an observant reporter says, I think with practice he could become a professional. And then it's noted that there are other very good ball players that have come to play for the Quequechan team. And their names are Fennelly and Gunning, and we're going to be talking about them. Fennelly's a shortstop, and he doesn't play it nervously as his predecessor, according to the reporter. But as the season goes on, Buck is getting better and better. He's got twisters and a puzzling riser. And we find out by the end of the season that it's not Buck, it's Buff. So finally we've come upon Charles Buffington as our first important baseball player. His problem is that he goes up against Harry Stovey. Harry Stovey, it's actually Harry Stowe, but his mother hated baseball so much that he had an assumed name so she wouldn't think he was playing such a disreputable sport. Bancroft put together the best New Bedford team made up of professionals like Stovey, and they went up against Buffington. And Stovey got a little bit the best of it. Buffington gave up 3 singles, a triple, and a monstrous home run to Stovey. But the game ended 13-13 because it was getting dark, and New Bedford actually forfeited and said, we've got to get home, it's getting dark. So Fall River got that game. The second game was played for the Intercity Championship, and Buffington won 8-5 with 10 strikeouts. So Fall River at least defeated New Bedford in 1879. 1880, I don't find anything about baseball. About the only thing I find interesting, because there is a connection, John Brayton's wife, John Brayton has enough influence in Republican circles that his wife and daughter go to Washington and they visit Lemonade Lucy Hayes and her husband, President Rutherford B. Hayes. Turning to 1881 now, there's a lot of activity going on in Fall River. There's cricket. Cricket's being played at South Park. The city has paid $95 for a new mowing machine, and they've done the crease beautifully so that they'll be able to roll the ball in the cricket game. And who's the famous bowler? It's George that we just talked about, who's also, as I said, a cricket player and a baseball player. And so George Wright is in town. We're looking now at the fact that the Scots that are in town have the Caledonian Games. They play a lot of different sports. And now we go on to the great entertainment that develops in this year at Forest Hills Garden, and you can see all the different things that are done. The entrepreneurs brought in a cage full of monkeys, no politicians among them. They ordered reindeers, and they ordered buffalo and the lions. I don't think they ever showed up. But, you know, in all the research I've done, I have to say I've now added to an understanding of the ethnic diversity of Fall River, because they also brought in Bohemian glassblowers. So that was a big change. The most important thing that happened in 1881 was there was a police detective named Bat Shea, and he talked to John S. Brayton and Mary Brayton Young, and the Braytons thought that baseball was a good game for the city, and so they gave a piece of land. They owned the Summerfield Methodist Church, which is still there on the corner of Hood Street and North Main, and so between what is now used as apartments and the fire barn, there was a ball field. And Bat Shea knew a contractor, and he got him to turn over the field and roll it. So they now had a baseball field at the very lowest part against North Main Street to develop a team. And so they bought white uniforms. Shea bought white pants, white jerseys. Mrs. Shea was a very good seamstress. She made them into baseball uniforms. And Bat Shea called the team the Fall Rivers and put a red FR on each of the uniforms, red socks, red caps, white canvas shoes. They said the Fall Rivers looked as good as any Major League Baseball team. And Bat Shea basically brought the best talent onto his team in 1881, and 5 of the players that are with him in 1881 are going to go on to professional status. That professional status came on the real red letter day. It was May 17th, 1882. The captain of the Boston National League team telegraphed Fall River. Charlie Buffington's friends went to Boston, and they saw their friend Buffington pitch in his first Major League game, a 4-0, 4-hit shutout, caught by Ed Rowan, one of the catchers from Fall River in the 1870s. Again, that diagram you have are all players that came from outside Fall River, played for Fall River in the 1870s. So tonight we're talking about the next stage where you've got Fall River-born players going on to Major League status. Buffington was praised as being cool and collected, having a splendid command, a delivery that was very puzzling, almost an El Tiante fashion. Looking back on his life later, the newspaper Sporting Life talked about Buffington and said, quote, "And when but a mere boy, his love of sport began." Well, that love was challenged. He was catching at one point, and he suffered a bad blow to the eye. And, you know, they talk about catchers with tools of ignorance. It's good to have the tools. You have to think about there were no shin guards till 1907 in professional football. There were no protective cups until 1916. Better to be a pitcher than a catcher. Anyway, Buffington didn't play the rest of the year until late in September. He was brought back up. He had a so-so time. He brought the team to Fall River, and he pitched a 2-hitter against the best of our amateurs for Boston. They started to talk about he had a drop pitch, and it looked like it fell off a table, much like Kurt Gowdy used to say about Tommy Brewer's curveball in the 1950s. I remember that vividly. He had the most perplexing curves in the country. They exploded. Now, later on, Sporting News would say that Charlie Buffington, looking back on it, was the Christy Mathewson of the 1880s. That's pretty impressive, and I think he's our greatest athlete in Fall River history. In 1883, he became, I'd say, the best pitcher in America. He won. He was a starter now. There were two major pitchers in 1883 for the Boston national team, Buffington and Grasshopper Jim Whitney. Whitney was a veteran. He had an extremely small head. They said it was the size of a watt, And so they said Bonham had people like that. They call them pinheads. But anyway, Grasshopper Jim liked to throw at people, and he had a big advantage because if you hit someone, it was only a ball. So he and Buffington do very, very well, and they win. They win the National League Series in 1883. They're the champs. His first full season, Buffington has helped lead them to a championship. Now, the interesting thing that could have happened in 1883 is there was a second major league now. The National League was formed in 1876. The American Association was recognized in 1882. There was talk about a postseason World Series. The Philadelphia athletic teams of the AA had Harry Stovey as their star. Stovey was badly injured late in the year. He had set a record for home runs. And if he had been healthy, I think we would have had our first World Series, and Harry Stovey of New Bedford would have been matched up against Charlie Buffington. But as it turned out, what happened is there was a postseason series, and it was arranged by Jim Moutry, who had gone from Fall River to be the manager of the New York Mets. The Mets, though, weren't the first place team in the AA. So Buffington and Boston won this postseason duel in beating Moutry's Mets, but they again weren't winning against the champions of the American Association. Now let's go into the 1884 season. There are 6 major leaguers from Fall River playing, imagine that, in the year 1866. And this is the most famous year in baseball history in the late 19th century. We're going to have, can we just go on one more, please? We're going to be playing Providence. Providence is led by Old Hoss Radwin, okay? And Old Hoss Radwin is up against Buffington and the Boston team. It's the Providence Grays. And they're going to have 3 series. Could we just, that's a beautiful park, isn't it? That was as nice a park as you had in Major League Baseball at that time. And could we go on to the next one? Charlie Buffington, there's Charlie at bat. And what's going to happen is there's going to be three major series between the defending champion Boston and the Providence Grays in 1884. In the June series, Buffington pitches 2 shutouts in the first 3 games that he pitches. He allows 1 run in 3 games. So he's done magnificently well. The second series is in July, and someone says, just see that Buff. Awkward as a cow, but spry as a cat. So he's a very good defensive fielder. In the first game in Providence, he comes up to bat, and Fall River fans stop play, and the umpire lets them walk out with a basket of flowers, which they present to Buffington, and then Buffington wants to get a great hit, but much to his disgust, he popped up. Buffington lost that game 2-0, but then the next day, back in Boston with over 6,000 fans, which was a good number, a good crowd, there was a perfect ovation when Buff took the mound, and took the box, rather, I should say, and Buffington won 7-1 with 13 strikeouts. He went on to win 2 more games, pitching brilliantly, and in the last game, he got 3 hits off Old Hoss Radwin. Rich, go on. So here's what was happening. It was halfway through the season, more than halfway through the season. Boston was 43-15, and it looked like they were well on their way to their second straight championship. And Buffington is considered, again, the best pitcher in baseball, and it looks like it's going to be a fantastic ending there. But it doesn't happen. There's a third series, and in this series, Providence and Boston are virtually deadlocked. Now, what's happened, and I mentioned this to those that were here last year, there was a great pitcher for Providence, Charlie Sweeney. His problem was he walked off into the sunset with 2 prostitutes one day after getting himself very drunk. So Providence was in trouble, except Old Hoss Radwin said that he would pitch every game if they would give him a raise, pay him the 2 salaries of Sweeney and himself. And Radwin went on to win 18 straight games, including 4 in this final decisive series. Now, 3 of the losses went to Buffington. Buffington had a tough time. The first game was considered to be the most significant game played in the major leagues probably for the first 40 years or so. And it involves a guy named Arthur Irwin. Arthur Irwin is always involved with Fall River players. And Arthur Irwin comes up to bat in the 11th inning. It's 0-0, Radwin against Buffington. Charlie Buffington has faced 27 batters over the first 9 innings. He's pitched a perfect game from the 2nd inning through the 10th inning. He strikes out the first batter in the 11th inning. Up comes Arthur Irwin. Arthur Irwin Arthur Irwin doesn't look like a huge threat, does he? He hits 5 home runs in 3,781 at-bats, okay? But on this day, if the two of them had been on a boat, Buffington probably would have thrown him overboard. Now, I say that purposely because many years later, Arthur Irwin was on a boat, some say a 4-river-line boat, and he apparently threw himself overboard. And then it was realized that he had a little bit of a problem. He had families in Boston and New York. His grandson, into I would suggest moral relativism, has said recently, as far as I know, my grandfather didn't smoke or drink. Having 2 wives was his only vice. Today, nobody would think twice about it. So at any rate, Buffington gives up a long fly ball to Irwin. It goes through a hole in an unrepaired fence, considered a game-winning home run. So Buffington has lost 1-0 in 11 innings. The next game he pitches, he throws a 4-hitter, and he loses again because of unearned runs. And so the bottom line is Buffington throws 3 games. He gives up 1 earned run in 28 innings, and he loses 3 times to Radwin. So it's just a matchup. Now, if we go on to the, again, please, Rich. That's Mootry, by the way, in the middle. I think I'm ahead. Did we see a picture of, no, we'll stop there then. I think we might have gone by it. Ed Acorn, did the one come up with the 59 victories? Yeah. If we could go back to that. Yeah. Ed Acorn, who I've spoken to, has written the standard book. Old Hoss Radwin went on to win not only the regular season, but the World Series in 1884. So the greatest season anyone ever had. But Charlie Buffington had just finished a 48-win season, which is 5th in Major League history. He got married late in the season, and right after that, he struck out 17 in one game, including 8 in a row. So they both had great seasons. But a Fall River newspaper said it best. Can it be that the extra strain put on them last year took the vim out of their pitching muscles? The problem was, listen to this, Buffington had pitched 587 innings, and Radwin had pitched 679. So neither of them were ever able to get back to the famous year of 1884. Interestingly, despite the fact that Radwin is so remarkable, the #1 sports writer of his day, writing in the 2nd decade of the 20th century, said this about the time we've just covered. But for my mind, Buffington had all the best of it. Radwin had perfect control of the ball, but he had not as near as effective a delivery as the Boston player. Whitney in '83 and Buffington in '84 pitched the most effective ball of any major leaguers before or since. That's the guy that had been watching Major League Baseball from the 1880s, and it was now, I think it was 1912 when he said that. Now, let's turn to, if we can go jump ahead, we're going to catch up to another successful ball player, Frank Fennelly. That's Old Hoss. Again, Old Hoss. All right, Frank Fennelly had a 7-year major league career. He had a strong start like Buffington. He was really the rookie of the year playing for Washington, and he was traded to Cincinnati, and Cincinnati paid $3,500 for him. That was the highest amount of money that any ball player had ever commanded. And he had a very good rookie season, batting .311, leading the league until he damaged his ankle late in the season. The next year, he batted a little bit lower, .273, but he had 10 home runs, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. Fennelly had 34 home runs. He had some pop in his bat. And Stovey led the majors with 13 in 1885. Again, there's 2 major leagues. Stovey's got 13, somebody had 11, Fennelly had 10. Same with triples. Fennelly, for the both major leagues, was second with 17 triples. His problem came with 1887. In 1887, big advantage went away from the batters. Up until that point, you could tell the pitcher you have to throw a high strike or a low strike. And if the pitcher, you want to, everybody has their strength area, right? So you want a low strike. The pitcher's got to throw it there. If he throws a ball that's high, it'll be called a ball. So that went away, and so did Fennelly's batting average. It slipped. He ended up batting .257. Very fast runner. He tore his ligaments in his leg in 1890. It destroyed his major league career. But before that, we just look at a couple of other things. There he is playing for Cincinnati. And again, Rich, please. We'll go again. He and Bud McPhee were the best double play combination in the 19th century. And Fennelly was a little bit error prone. The next one, please. But he had so many more chances than any other player. He just had a great range, and again, they were the best double play combination by far. So and you know what? He's a great guy. They immediately, as a rookie in 1885, Cincinnati voted him team captain. And I think he always had that personality. Later, he was a very successful small businessman here in Fall River, and he became a state representative, elected multiple times. Now, we're going to go to a third person. Keep your eye on the ball, Tom. Tom Gunning does not have a start like Buffington and Fennelly. He's a substitute catcher, and he's playing in the Polo Ground, and this is the guy that's the field captain, and he lives in mortal fear of him. The guy is foul-mouthed and hot-tempered, a man of worst humor, a fit subject for a lunatic asylum, according to several people. Well, Burdick said, "You're not playing today, kid. You're gonna be the umpire." The umpire didn't show up, and it's eight innings into the game. It's a tie game, but Burdick thinks maybe the Giants are going to win the game. So he says to Gunning, "Okay, kid, call the game." So Gunning calls the game, and the New York press said it was cloudy, but it wouldn't have been dark till about an hour later. But Gunning said, "No, the game's called because of darkness." So the fans didn't appreciate that, and they poured onto the field. And we'll just hold that one for a minute. I used that one last year, but I couldn't resist those two. But the fans forgot themselves, and they said, well-dressed men and handsome women delivered a stunning blow to the jaw of our Fall River catcher. And then they chased him into the dressing room, and the police finally had to push people out of the ballpark. But the fans wouldn't go away. They wanted it Gunning. So the police finally had to form a flying wedge and get him to public transportation and off to a hotel. Gunning just wasn't a good ball player, and so he turned to umpiring. It was a sport it was a position that really wasn't well received. When a man sinks so low he no longer has a friend on earth, the position of baseball umpire is all that is left him. So poor old Bob Ferguson, who is yet on earth and umpiring, gave additional evidence yesterday of his infirmity. That's the kind of comments you'd get. My favorite blue-collar worker, I think, that had a day off, but he still had a job, he was the Arlington National Cemetery gatekeeper. And this person came up and got a little bit confused and said to him, and this guy's a crusty, no-nonsense guy, says to him, "What kind of soldiers are buried here?" The person can't remember whether it's a Union or a Confederate cemetery. He says, "Dead ones." So at any rate, he continued to have a terrible, terrible time. He played ineffectively. He gets traded with Buffington to Philadelphia. He smashes his thumb. The one good thing that happens is he starts to study medicine. And at the end of 1887, he's released by the Philadelphia team. And interestingly, the players are all upset because they like him so much and his friend Buffington. They have a time for him. They present both of them with diamond studs. And he finally, in 1890, says, "I think I'm going to get my medical degree pretty soon." Beyond these three guys, we have some cup of coffee people. If we could just quickly look at, that's another one of, that's again Fennelly. Tony Cusick, handsome Tony Cusick, he played with Buffington and gunning in Philadelphia, had a pretty interesting career as a fielder, certainly not much of a hitter. Then there was Sam LaRock, who hit the longest home run in the history of South Park. There was a pitcher named McFarland. Father Mac and I, when we did our baseball book, missed Chris McFarland. And I was a little disappointed that sport editor Mike Thomas picked up that there was a Chris McFarland that had played baseball at the major league level. Well, in 1884, I looked this up, 1884, for 1 year there was a third major league, the Union League. But they called it, the critic called it the Onion League because it stunk. And this guy ended up pitching. Well, they let him try out as an outfielder. He had 7 chances. He made 3 errors. So they said, "Okay, McFarland, we're going to put you out there. You can be our pitcher. 3 innings, 9 hits, 10 runs." He came back to Fall River. Now, let's go to a better story. Jim Manning. Jim Manning is a Division Street son of a shopkeeper. He's a graduate of the Mass College of Pharmacy, and it's Glenn. He is persuaded to try baseball by his friend Fennelly. His problem is right away, one of his first games he's playing, he twists his ankle. It immediately blows up. The Boston manager says, "I'm going to put Buffington out in center field for Manning." Now, the problem is they're playing Chicago. Chicago has this Cap Anson, who we're going to feature, Adrian Cap Hansen. He's a bully. He's ferocious. He's got a sandpaper tongue. They say when he's chastising other teams and umpires, his own players are quailing. So the year before, a Philadelphia catcher caught a ball wrong, and his thumb immediately was twice its size. And you could only remove someone for a serious injury and put in a substitute. Anson says, "That's nothing." And he made the catcher continue. So you can figure out what happened. Now Manning's got a swollen ankle. He faints. He comes back. Anson says he can keep playing. The Boston manager says, "No, we can't." So long short is Boston played with 8 players because Anson wouldn't allow Buffington to replace him. Now, he's not a good baseball hitter, but he's a good fielder. And the highlight is he and his friend Ned Hanlon were on the same team when Detroit won the 1887 World Series, Hanlon having been a legendary player here in Fall River. Now, more importantly, we reached the cream of the crop. We have Albert Spaulding deciding that he's going to go on a world tour. He's going to bring baseball to the world. After the 1888 season, they're going to move around and show the American game off. This was considered by Chadwick, the father of baseball, the most important event in the history of modern sports. So what happened is Spaulding owns the Chicago team that Anson's coaching. They're going to go up against some All-Americas. And the All-Americas have to be men of clean habits and attractive personality, men who would reflect credit upon their country and upon the game of baseball. And so they take off around the world, going to Hawaii, and then they began playing ball in December of 1888. George Wright had gone along to play cricket. He was going to train the American baseball players to play cricket when they got to the British Isles, along with baseball. 10,000 fans turned out. 10,000 fans turned out in Melbourne to watch the Americans play baseball, the Chicagos going up against Manning and his All-Americas. They crossed the Indian Ocean. It was hot. They were panting in the sun like so many lizards. And then they got to Egypt. And they decided they're going to play ball around the Sphinx and the pyramids. Some of the Egyptians were horrified. Manning was the first person to run up to the top of the pyramid successfully, and then they tried to throw baseballs over the pyramids, et cetera, et cetera. But perhaps the most embarrassing thing as we look back on it was that Cap Anson was not only a bully, he was an outright racist. We had a 19th century Major League ball player who was black, well before Jackie Robinson, but Anson was responsible for drawing the color line. And so knowing that, his Chicago team has a mascot. The mascot is Clarence Dougal. Keep going on that, Richard, please. There's Clarence, okay? Now, Clarence is described in the press of the day as a pickaninny, a nig, a coon, and a darky mascot. But he's good luck to have with us, right? His grin is broad, and his face is as black as the ace of spades. Whenever anything goes wrong, it's only necessary to rub Clarence's woolly head, and everything will be right. That's what was going on at that time. Manning ended up playing down south, as we'll see, and I hope he wasn't one of these people, but I wonder. Several players had Clarence put on a catcher's mask and wear 2 gloves. They tethered a rope around him, and they marched him around the Cairo railroad station. So that's what's going on. When they finally got, and I noticed this now, in the pictures you see, it's always Hanlon, the former Fall River Right, with his friend Manning. They're inseparable. They get to Ireland, and Jim Manning gets to go to Callan County, Kilkenny, and he says all of his relatives came out. And it was like I had dropped out of the clouds. And they couldn't believe, they were incredulous. You earn your living playing a game? But at any rate, they finally got on to England. They got to go to the House of Commons. They got to go to Westminster Abbey. And then they played a game in front of a future king, the Prince of Wales. The Prince of Wales got so excited in an Anson triple that he slapped Spalding on the knee and in the royal box. And Spalding tapped him on the shoulder. Big mistake of protocol. But then again, Spalding probably wouldn't know better. He's a little bit stuck on himself. In his home Chicago stadium, he has a big gong, and he bangs it whenever he wants a servant to bring him anything during the game. So at any rate, they finally returned. They ultimately went back to Chicago, but before that, they went to Delmonico's, and Teddy Roosevelt and people of that ilk, Mark Twain, greeted them for their feat of pluck, having brought baseball successfully around the world. And so this was really something. Spalding ended up losing about $50,000, but he advertised his firm. And he said it was more than worthwhile investment. And he was very happy that he'd done it. And so that's where we are basically with professional baseball. I'd like to switch gears and get back to local baseball. We're playing a lot of good amateur baseball at this time, and none's playing much better than Everett Durfee. Everett Durfee was a graduate of Brown. Go on beyond that. And he was hired to teach in the first year that the new Durfee High School was going to open. And he was invited to various functions, noticed by John S. Brayton, et cetera, for the dedication. And besides being a teacher, and Durfee has an elite number of graduates, a lot of Harvard and Brown graduates. Go on again, Richard, please. A lot of them are playing sports like this. And four of us gaga now about sports. We have a great cricket team. We're going to see in a minute. We have the Rovers. They became the United States soccer champions the next year, 1888. So they have their own stadium. It's really remarkable what's going on. But again, back to baseball. Lee Richmond had pitched for Brown, and he pitched in the major leagues. The major leagues hired him, and he pitched a no-hitter, and then he followed that up by pitching a perfect game. And so, a team like Brown was very, very good, very competitive. And Everett Durfee, who was a strong guy, his father was a blacksmith, and he held him. Everett Durfee then was the shortstop for Brown. Now, in 1887, he's playing for the best Fall River amateur team, the Tecumsehs, okay? He's the shortstop. He's batting third. We can go on from that, Richard. There's a lot of teams like McQuarrie's, but again, please, hold it on that one. Here's the deal. He's batting third for the Tecumsehs. The Tecumsehs have 8 Irish Catholics, and Durfee batting third and shortstop. That's 8 more Irish Catholics than Everett Durfee would have been teaching with at Durfee. Compliments of the Braytons. All right, that aside, I got that out of my system. At any rate, the North End grounds that the Braytons had given to Bat Shea were now enclosed. And so the game's getting very serious on a local level. It's like a semi-pro level, and there'd be as many as 1,100 fans that would come to games on a Saturday afternoon after the mills got out. And what would happen is the teams would play for the gate receipts. The team that won got the entire gate receipts, and then there'd be side bets, usually about $75. So they're very competitive, and they're trying to load up, one team trying to load up to be the best. And so they finally think they're good enough to challenge all professional teams. The New England League is reestablished in 1885, and one of the teams has Mike McDermott of Fall River pitching. Mike comes and he pitches 2 games against our best amateurs, and they said the Fall River fans were split because Mike was so popular. Mike beat them twice. Then Lynn came to town. Lynn was the champion NEL team, and they expected to be up against a bunch of schoolboys. Well, they ended up winning, but as they said in leaving, there's no soft thing about that team. And Durfee had really distinguished himself by three steals. Tommy Cahill, which I think he was just up, Tommy Cahill was playing for them. Now, he's a terrific rising star who, when he leaves to go back to Holy Cross to play baseball, is given a gold-tipped cane by the manager and his other players. So we've really got some good things going on at the amateur level. There again is the best team that we've just been talking about. The next one, please, Richard. Okay, let's go back to the major leagues. 1887, the news, Buffington and Gunning for the Phillies. What's happened in 85 and 86 is Buffington has a lame shoulder. He just can't pitch the innings that he had. He goes 29 and 37 over the 2 years. Again, remember he had won 48 the year before. And it said only occasionally does he have a game like he had. And then he goes to Philadelphia, and he doesn't like Philadelphia. He heard that management is cheap. But at any rate, he is playing for them. He still has problems over the next couple of years. He hurts his hand. He has eyesight problems, etc. But he's doing pretty well again as a pitcher in 1888, 1889. And he's with Fennelly and Gunning. Buffington's in the middle there, 4th from the top. Very, very thin, very trim. The manager is Harry Wright, the Venerable Harry Wright, and there's a father-son relationship throughout their careers between Harry Wright and Fall River's Buffington. Now, let's jump ahead to, there's Harry Wright right in the middle. Just jump ahead a little bit, Richard. This is the Philadelphia team, and we're going to see one fellow in a minute named Fogarty. And I'll get back to him. Just run through these. This is Jim Fogarty. He'll get back to. This is a girly picture. Now, anyway. And here's the trainer that would have been taking care of Buff for his health problems. Not exactly Ted Kluszewski being taken care of, but at any rate, this is the kind of stadium that Buffington is going to be pitching in as we approach the season 1890. But he's not going to be pitching for the Philadelphia national team in 1890. Again, if we go on, Richard. Buffington has, as I said, been very, very good toward the end of the 1880s. One of the most successful pitchers in terms of winning percentage in 1888. We could just go on to the next slide. Again, he's right up there at the top, 1888, 1889. Now we'll go on to the turbulent seasons. Okay, 1890. The 1890 season is the most important season in Major League history from the start of professional baseball at the National League in 1876 to the formation of the American League in 1901. But it's a series of discord. The ball players have organized themselves essentially into a union. They call it the Brotherhood. And their leader is John Ward. John Montgomery Ward, Monty, had pitched for the Providence Grays and then had hurt his arm and had converted himself into an all-star shortstop. He was coming off an 1889 season that I mentioned last year where he was playing for Jim Moutry's Giants team, and he was the first Mr. October. He had personally won the World Series for the Giants in 1889. But he's more than just a ball player. He's a very talented man. He's got a couple of college degrees, and he ends up getting a law degree from Columbia. He speaks 5 languages. He's married to the leading movie star of the time. He's the whole package. And he's going to defend the Major League players by writing an article in Lippincott's magazine, Is the Ball Player a Chattel? And basically what Ward and the ball players are saying is, we are being treated like slaves 20 plus years after the Civil War because we are forced to stay with a team through the reserve contract. And besides the reserve contract, there's something new to complain about as we approach 1890, and that this guy is an owner, and he's come up with the brush plan. And what the brush plan is, you're going to categorize all major leaguers in there's 5 categories, and you're going to pay them accordingly. But the top level, the A level, is going to have a ceiling which is like $1,500 less than the best players have been paid so far. And part of your being categorized had to do how nice you were to management. So the players said, we're being graded like cattle being led off to the slaughter. And there's a lot of tension. I love this one. The general manager sends something to a player. The player opens it. There's a message. In your haste to return your contract, you forgot to sign your name. The player to the general manager, in your haste to give me a raise, you wrote in the wrong number. So now, let's get back to that ball that went through the fence. The ball went through the fence because of cheap Arthur Soden. Arthur Soden is a millionaire Bostonian Yankee, one of the kind that the Irish called miserable. He's got a manic frugality. Common sense teaches me, he says, baseball is conducted to make money. And Arthur Soden, the owner of the Boston NL team, certainly plans that to be true. It's not easy for the players. You get injured, you don't get paid. You are charged to repair and clean and replace your uniforms. You go on the road, you have 50 cents a day subtracted from your pay. A player is dismissed by Soden. What did I do? You didn't tip your hat to me. So Soden brings brown bags peanut butter sandwiches to the ballpark. He doesn't fix fences. He insists the baseball be used until the cover comes off. He charges the wives of the players. He rips out the press box for more seats. That got him a lot of good publicity in the newspapers. And then later on, when they advanced to dugouts, there was a big game, and he put a bench back out on the field. Told the players, you go out on the bench, I'm going to sell the dugout seats. So now, the other thing they did besides the reserve rule is there was a blacklist that was frequently being used, et cetera, et cetera. So long short, the players rebel, and they create their own major league. 1890, there's the Players National League, or the Brotherhood League, against the National League. Now remember, there's also an American Association. So suddenly there's 3 major leagues. And most of the players leave the National League, and they create the Player League. Now what's good about that is they've convinced certain capitalists to share everything with them. So each team would have 4 capitalists and 4 players in charge, and any profits would be split. So, and the big thing was, after 3 years, you'd be a free agent. So the players had found a bunch of capitalists that were willing to work with them better than the National League. Now, the National League has to respond, and do they ever? They come up with a war committee. You could not come up with a better war committee. One of them is Colonel John Ignatius Rogers. Rogers had tried to get King Kelly, that you just saw King Kelly. He tried to bribe King Kelly. I'll give you $10,000 under the table if you won't go over to the Players League. King Kelly said, no, I can't do that with the boys. So King Kelly went over. But John Rogers is an attorney, and he's developed the standard contract, player contract, that reserves players so they can't be free agents. And he hates anybody who represents organized labor. He was Colonel Rogers, and he had literally shot his way into Pittsburgh. We're coming to this one in a minute. That's Chicago, but this is Pittsburgh in 1877. And there were great railroad strikes. And Colonel Rogers came into Pittsburgh with his soldiers, shot his way into the city, and then had to shoot his way out as the town people took over and destroyed railroad property. So he can't stand the working class. And the picture we just showed in advance is of the Haymarket Square bombing in 1886. A terrorist bomb being thrown at police, supposedly. Well, if you got that kind of tense environment that exists between capital and labor, Rogers, we'll fight these ingrates with everything we have, and it won't take long before we have these jumpers crawling home. Spaulding's his partner on the war committee. Spaulding says those players are a bunch of secret organization strikers. They're hot-headed anarchists. They're socialists. They're terrorists. He has a conniption fit, they said, when he found out what the players were doing, that they were abandoning the National League. But this is a guy you want to have on your, these 2 guys you want to have on your side. You want them to be friends rather than enemies. What Spaulding says is, I'm for war without quarter. I want to fight until one of us drops dead. It will simply be a case of dog eat dog, and the dog with the bulldog tendencies will live the longest. So what they do is they simply lie. Both leagues try to say we're drawing more fans, etc. Spaulding very candidly said, you know what, they should build a monument to the first person that tells the truth. But he certainly didn't tell the truth. He certainly became known as the Windy City Fake. And a typical example of how he handled the press, reporter can't make it to the game, says, calls him, how many fans did you have yesterday? He says, 2418. And the reporter says, thanks, I'll report that. The secretary of the club says, how'd you come up with that number? Oh, there were 24 on the grandstand on the left and 18 on the right. So, as Spaulding said, it was printer's ink and bluff. Buffington is right in the mix. Buffington is the manager of Buffington's Beauties, the Philadelphia Players League team. They call themselves the Union Quakers, and he's a tough guy. One of the players said, I was afraid to even tell Buffington I'm not going to stick with the players. I'm going to go back to the National League because I'm afraid he intimidates me. So Buffington's really a stand-up guy for the players. Now, ultimately, the Players League was popular, but they had too many problems. They had to buy ballparks. Go on to that, Richard. They had to buy ballparks or rent them. And thanks to Bob Kitchen from last week, Bonham's competition, Adam Forepaugh, had a ballpark in Philadelphia, and Buffington and his team rented for this particular year. The players made one big mistake. And we can keep going. Well, first of all, they had to face this reality. There's a lot of people that could care less whether ball players do better or not, right? Because they have such an easy life, and they're making too much money anyway. And so you'd have that kind of cynicism. The professional ball player has a hard time, rises every morning at 10 o'clock, takes a snug breakfast in the cafe, reads the newspapers, strolls out, smokes a cigar, takes a nap before dining at 2 o'clock, strolls to the ball field for a couple of hours of exercise, in the evening goes off to the theater. At any rate, what happened is the players did a lot better on Saturday afternoons, but they decided, the Puritanical Times, they decided not to play Sunday games. And that's where they would have drawn the working class. The working class wanted the players to win, but so they sort of shot themselves in the foot. And so, at any rate, the season ended, and this is Monty Ward. They met at the Home Run Saloon in New York City, and they had simply been outmaneuvered without my going into all the details. But the Spalding and Rogers convinced some of the owners from the Players League to join them for the next season. So rather morosely, Buffington and Ward got together at a saloon in New York City, and famously Ward said, "Pass the wine, the Players League is dead." And indeed it was. Well, we turn to the next season then, 1891. Rogers, let Jimmy Fogarty return to the Phillies. Fogarty is actually dying of terminal illness. But I don't want any of the others coming back from the Players League. Above all, not Buffington. And so Charlie Buffington is blacklisted in 1890 from the National League. But he can still go in 1891 to the American Association. The Players League is gone, but we still have this second major league. And so Buffington ends up with the Boston Reds for 1891. He gets ready by mentioning he's taken off a superfluous 20 pounds. Buffington pitches for the Boston Reds then of the AA, and he's the best pitcher in baseball again. By the end of August, the reporters are saying he's got the best control, the fewest walks in Major League Baseball. The Reds are a great team, and Buffington contributes to it. He ends up with a 29-9 record in 1891, despite pitching in a hitter-friendly ballpark. He has the best winning percentage in baseball. And they are the champions. They are the champions. They would have been even better, but Connie Mack was stolen away by Ned Hanlon. And otherwise, Connie Mack would have been catching Buffington in the year 1891. And to this day, Hanlon's team are called the Pirates because of him snatching away Connie Mack. Another player that should have been playing for the Reds was Mike Kelly, King Kelly. But Kelly switched back to the National League. He signed with the AA and switched back to the National League. Someone said he should play left-handed since he said he would chop off his right arm before he would do that. But at any rate, Kelly was a character. One time he hit a home run and he did handsprings all around the bases. I'd love to see how David Price would react to that. But at any rate, the Reds had won the Players League championship in 90. They win now in 91, and then they're defunct. Before they go defunct, they challenged the winners of the National League, who are is the Boston team that Kelly went over to, the Bean Eaters. So it would have been the Reds against the Bean Eaters. But the Bean Eaters declined the challenge. So in 1891, there was no World Series. It would have been the only time two Boston teams had met in a World Series. And baseball historians think that despite Kelly being on the other team, that Buffington's team was more talented and they probably would have won the World Series. So when we look at Buffington then, what happens? The winners, Spalding and those fellows, create one league in 1892. They buy out the American Association. They give some of the weaker teams' owners money, and then they add the 4 best teams, okay? So starting in 1892, you have for the first time what is called truly the big league. And there's 12 teams, so there's no World Series. They play 2 halves, and the first half champion would play the second half champion if it was different. I've got that on the back of that handout where you can see what happened in the 1890s. Now, poor Buffington, he gets blacklisted. The only place he can go play is Baltimore in 1892. If you saw the movie 42, it's like being exiled to Pittsburgh in the movie 42. Baltimore is not the place you want to go in 1892. It's hot. It's notorious for the ballpark being near flat tidelands where the biggest mosquitoes and the most flies exist in all the major leagues. But Buffington is forced to go there, and when he gets there, they decide they're going to reduce his pay after he plays for a little while. Buffington says, no way. And so Buffington, who's always a stand-up guy and had fought the Spauldings of the world, retires and comes back to Fall River. He's the first league player to prefer a release to a reduction. Sort of interesting to know what he was getting reduced to, too, because Connie Mack, his friend Connie Mack, had exactly the same thing. He started at $2,400. Management says you can keep playing for $1,400. Mack kept playing. Buff did not. So Buff's career ends. We look back on an abbreviated ending. He played technically for 11 years, but short time the first and last years. He won championships in his first and his last full seasons. He had 7 healthy full seasons. In that time, he was 198 and 104. Pedro was 219 and 100. So this guy was a good pitcher. Overall, he had 233 major league wins and a winning percentage in excess of 60. Let me conclude by finishing with a snapshot of Fall River in 1893. The Bedford Street grounds were now the YMCA grounds. The YMCA had purchased the Bedford Street grounds for track purposes and for gymnastic purposes. The Y was having a lot of trouble at that time, and maybe this wasn't a good decision. They're having a lot of money problems. They made this commitment. The Secretary General of the Y slit his throat. But otherwise, things were okay. Now, a Booster newspaper says, look, Fall River should get back to its championship spirit of '76. It's a shame that we have a fine and a growing city, and we haven't kept up our professional baseball tradition. Somebody should do this. Well, there was that somebody, and it was the aforementioned Mike McDermott. Mike McDermott organized a stock company, and he leased the grounds from the YMCA, and he said, I'm going to repair a fence, I'm going to put in a brand new grandstand, and I'm interested in ball players. Anybody that wants to play for the team is in 1893 can contact me at 58 Tremont Street. Now, one of the people that contacted him was Frank Fennelly. Fennelly, like Buffington said, I've taken off considerable flesh, and he said that my leg has healed, the leg he had injured back in 1890. He says, I'll play in 1893, and he will play for Mike McDermott. Gunning has graduated from the University of Pennsylvania Medical School. He is not about to go into baseball. Now, Jimmy Manning, that's a very interesting case. Again, he's a pharmacist. He's managing the Smith drugstore after the 1892 season. Now, think about this. He takes over in October of 1892 managing this store. A couple of months before, a young Miss Lizzie had come into the Smith store looking for prussic acid. And Eli Bentz had said no. But Manning was a very charming guy, and he liked the ladies. Maybe if he had been there 2 months earlier, he would have said, Eli, step aside. Miss Lizzie, here's your prussic acid, and maybe we'd know more about Lizzie Borden as a person than we do. Interesting, Manning is going to go south, And here's this Catholic kid from Fall River that's going to make a great success of himself in the Southern League as a player-manager for Savannah. The big question, and ultimately the big disappointment, how about the only Buff? McDermott asked him, please come out of retirement. Please come out of retirement and play for my team. And the only Buff says no. So the question is, would Mike be able to put together enough talent to play competitively in the 1893 season in the New England League and make a profit and in good time have the wherewithal to establish the first McDermott-Steiner? If all goes well, we'll find out next summer. Thank you. Thank you. I invite questions, comments, observations. Glenn?
I saw on the card that there was a lot of cigarette ads done in those times with the ball players on there.
A lot of what?
Tobacco companies.
Yeah.
Were they sponsoring the teams or helping the ball players out with them?
You know, really, next year I'd love to be able to, make a presentation. You're going to see a Bull Durham sign in the outfield at the Fall River Park. But yet, very much the connection of especially down south, and it's the first cards, the Old Judge cards. Actually, Father Mac gave me an Old Judge card of Charlie Buffington, and it came in a pack of cigarettes. And it's only like 1 1/4 inches by 1 1/4 inches, that type of thing. Yeah, but there is, unfortunately, that connection right from the beginning. Bob. Now, Bob Gagnon, the best baseball man in Fall River. How old at this age, Bob? How old are you today? 90. And may we all be as alert.
My question's going to be, what about after Joy in Fall River?
Next summer. We're right on the cusp. 1896 is Napa LaJoy's year, so we're close. We're close.
I know that Charlie Buffington died young. I think he was 46.
He was.
Do you know what he did after he retired?
Yeah, his dad, they had a tradition in the coal industry. His father was an executive in the coal industry, and when he retired, I think he probably made as much money. He's sort of a middle-class executive. Probably made as much money as he was making it if he had taken the reduction in pay. Other questions? I did want to, if no one asked me, I wanted to, Richard, could we show? Yes, Bob.
Where was the ball field on Bedford Street?
We're going to go by Bob Kitchen's father. Where was it, Bob? I'm still looking for it. The 1895 Atlas says the baseball grounds are where the Boys and Girls Club is. And so we're assuming that Nap played at that location in 1896, but it's not for certain. So I hope to have that answer by next year. A little trip to the assessor's office, compliments of Attorney Farrisee. All right, I thought this might be helpful to you because the game changed over time. But this would basically be the big advantages that the pitchers had. Buffington never pitched off a mound, okay? So it's an anachronism, but you always hear it to this day. A pitcher got knocked out of the box. But basically, they could move around in a box. And that's what Buffington was so good at early on. He had this motion where he took a couple of steps and whipped the ball. And he was deceptive, as they said, more than any other pitcher in baseball. So he took advantage of that. And it was only, before Buffington made it in 1882, you were pitching from 45 feet. And then the box was moved back to 50 feet, but I think that was the front of the box. So you'd have to now basically have your foot at the back of the box, at least to start. And then they changed it, and that would have affected Buffington. They actually said in 1887, when he pitched for the first time, a lot of his drop pitches were hitting in front of home plate because he was having trouble making the adjustment to the extra few feet. But again, I don't know how he would have done, because I think with the mound, because he was a drop pitcher basically, that could have only helped him had he been able to continue to play in 1892. Again, these advantages that you don't walk someone with 4 pitches, and then you have, as Richard goes down, you got the big thing that the batters have as a help, as you can say. That one's sort of really intriguing about there was one picture, you probably didn't pick up on it, but you could see the home plate was a diamond, and one corner faced the pitcher, but you've only got 12 inches of width. So obviously, today's mound is 17 inches, and it's just easier for the pitcher to target the present home plate. So that was a huge advantage. And again, a foul wasn't a strike until 1901. So some people would stay up and drive you crazy. They'd hit 10 or 15 fouls till they got the pitch they wanted, that type of thing.
What's that high-low tone?
That's the one that I said hurt. Yeah, you had to tell the, so, if the pitcher throws a ball that we would consider a strike, like right down the middle of the plate, but it's down here, and you've called for a high, it's a ball. So the pitcher always had to throw into the strength of the batter, and that was quite to the advantage. So I guess it's sort of a balance at that point. Yes, Steve.
These kids, these ball players all grew up in Florida or so forth. Where did they go to high school? The jerky was in existence.
Yeah, I haven't really looked at that. I think they went to the old Fall River High School, pre-Durfee. These guys were out and playing.
Durfee's in existence in 1893.
No, but I'm talking people like the people I'm talking about tonight were already through high school.
I'm referring to that.
But yeah, the people that we're going to pick up maybe next time would have gone to Durfee, but some of them would have gone to the old Fall River High School that predated the old Durfee building on Rock Street. I think it was on Pine Street. Was that right? It was Pine Street. Other questions?
Did they, when the new Durfee High School came out, 86, I guess, did they have baseball immediately?
As far as I know, they did. The question was, did Durfee High School have baseball immediately? And I think it was they did have. I did read about that. They did. And they challenged a lot of teams, even in Rhode Island. Well, you've been very attentive for a long time. Thanks so much. Okay.